Hello and welcome. You're tuned in to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio presents Holzer's Ghosts. They buried me alive. That's the episode we're discussing tonight. It is episode 2 from season 1. So it's been a little over a year. I had to watch the episode again twice just to refresh the brain because we have filmed so much between then and now. And this is one of my favorite episodes. I have not made any bones about it. I love history. I love when we can go to historic sites where amazing things take place. And our show does, I believe, a pretty good job of telling the history. But there are times when you have a location this amazing that you can't get to all the history. You miss out on a lot of why this place is so important and why it might be so haunted. We end up focusing in a very strange way. We focus right to the point we need to talk about because we can't spend an hour or two setting up why this place is so big. The episode, They Buried Me Alive, is at the Morris-Jumel Mansion. And this is a pretty amazing story because, let's face it, whether you're a believer or a skeptic or somewhere in the middle, like me, you're a skeptical believer, we're all looking for that one story. We're all looking for that one moment that seems to transcend just any other ghost story. The flickering of something out of the corner of your eye that makes your head turn. Old legends and wives' tales and lore about locations being haunted. We want something more. And the Morris-Jumel Mansion hits that on so many levels. Hans Holzer was brought to this story because of a moment with a ghost that wasn't just witnessed by one person, not witnessed by just 2 or 3 people, but witnessed by a group. That's right, a group. And it exploded. The news got a hold of it. It traveled around the world. People were hearing about this. And we're going to find out more about the Morris-Jumel Mansion. I've got 2 great guests joining me tonight. I had hoped to have, for those of you familiar with the episode, we brought in a priest practitioner in the art of Santeria. And I'm probably butchering what the proper terminology is for that. And we'll discuss that aspect of the story later, but I was unable to connect with him. I'm going to try to do an actual entire episode on that, maybe later on, where we go back in and focus on what happened with him. There's a funny story I'll mention tonight on the program. But it was really cool for Cindy and I, especially to witness this and watch. For our first guest, maybe not as cool to witness because it was 3:00 in the morning and he was in charge and it got real loud, real fast outside of the Morris-Jumel Mansion. But we'll discuss that in a few minutes. I've got 2 guests ready to join us. I'm going to bring my first guest on to introduce with you. If you watch the episode, you recognize Chris Davalos, who was and let me get this straight now. You've got a lot of different kind of names or titles that filtered in, but you were the director of like guest services and the interim director of the museum at the time we were there filming. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And how long had you been working with the Morris-Jumel Mansion?
Overall, 5.5 years. So it's a long time, but it was a great time. I loved my time there.
Very cool. Well, we're going to talk history with you. We'll talk history with our other guest as well, and your paranormal experiences, his paranormal experiences. But we're going to weigh a little heavier with you in the beginning here to set the stage for us, if you will. But I want to bring our next guest on with us as well. Vinny Carbone, where are you, buddy? I got your picture here, but I'm not seeing you. There you are. Did you not get the message? You're supposed to shave your head for tonight, Vinny? Can you hear us? Well, Vinny might have some connection issues. We'll hopefully be able to get him moving with us here. But Chris, let's start off with the Morris-Jumel Mansion. We're going to kind of do this in a weird order. Vinny, are you with us now? Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us, Vinny. We're going to go into some of the history with Chris, but so that our listeners know your work with the historic Morris-Jumel Mansion, give us just a little introduction. What did you do with the mansion? That is very little information to go off of. We're having some connectivity issues with Vinny, sadly. So we are going to stick.
I'm sorry. I thought you spoke Chris. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Vinny. What did you do there at the mansion? What was kind of your position working there?
I was the public programming events manager.
And you hosted a lot of the ghost hunts. Am I right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, it started out as a private investigation and just kind of blossomed from there. Once I started to talk to the executive director at that time, I was commissioned to write a play. And while working on a play at the museum, I was offered a full-time job as the events director, what my academic background was in. So, I started leading investigations, and it just kind of took off from there.
Excellent. All right. Well, Chris, there's a story that brought Hans Holzer to the Morris-Jumel Mansion. And I alluded to it in the opening. Can you go into this a little bit more deeply and tell us what was the instance that really kind of helped put this location on the paranormal map?
Sure. Well, it's always been a tradition for decades for public schools and now private and charter schools in this day and age, but public schools especially, to take tours of the mansion. It's part of their curriculum, if you will, to be a school kid in New York City because of Washington's time there. I know we alluded to a little bit on the show, but Washington actually lived at the mansion for 5 weeks. It's where he retreated from the Battle of Brooklyn to the mansion, which was not occupied at that time. So the kids come there to learn about the Battle of Harlem Heights, which took place, which was actually Washington's only victory in New York, and also as far as Washington's time there. So they're there to learn a lot about history. And back then, it wasn't the larger staff that it is now. It was actually run by the Daughters of the American Revolution, and there was a curator and really just a skeletal staff at that point. So the school kids and the teacher and chaperones, they got there on time, but there was a problem with the trains, and the curator was late. So kids are kids. It's cold. It's January. They're running around probably to stay warm and burn off some energy. And as they're doing this, a woman in period clothes appears on the balcony and she shushes them. She says, "Shh, be quiet or go home." And so they look at her and they think she is probably like a tour guide or reenactor. They just think she's a member of the staff. They actually don't pay that much attention to it. And there it is. And so when the curator finally gets there, she says, "Look, I'm so sorry. I had a problem with the trains. Let's go ahead and open up the house and we'll start the tour." Now, the grand portrait of Eliza Jumel, which is now in the main hallway, its original location, back then it was on the second floor. So the kids come in and they see all the first floor. And as they're going to the second floor, they see the portrait. And they said, "Hey, that's the lady that told us to be quiet. Where is she?" And so the curator looks at the teacher and she's like, "What are they talking about?" And the teacher goes, "Well, we were a little loud. She came out and kind of told us to keep it down, be quiet. Where is she? How is she part of the tour?" And the curator's like, "What are you talking about? That's Eliza Jumel. She's been dead for almost 100 years. This is in the daytime. Multiple witnesses, adults and children. So it's not like a small group of kids trying to make up something to get famous or do some shenanigans. There's a lot of people in the daytime who witnessed this." And then it somehow got to the newspapers, and that's how Hans Holzer, he read about this incident. And then from there, he was able to receive permission to do 2 seances at the mansion. So that's kind of where it all started. But our haunted history goes back to the 1800s. This is just the most public. And then when you incorporate media into the story, then boom, it just took off like wildfire.
Hey, how amazing is that? That is the holy grail moment for the paranormal. And I know I tossed that term around, but it is a full-bodied apparition.
Mm-hmm.
Comes out. I have to wonder because Dan Aykroyd has admitted that he was a huge fan of Hans Holzer and helped fashion the movie Ghostbusters on Hans Holzer and his work. And it starts with that famous scene in the New York City Library where they're making racket and the librarian turns and shushes them. and freaks everybody out. I'm wondering if that had any germ from the Morris-Jumel Mansion story.
Possibly creative license. It would make total sense to me.
Because that's pretty remarkable. And that you have this group of people that see it, kids and adults alike. Like you said, it spreads like wildfire through the media. How inundated does the house become at that point with media? Does it become a circus because everybody wants to talk about the ghost, or does it kind of remain in obscurity because of the time era? Because that was what, 64?
64. Actually, it was the management at that time, the group that was running it, they did not talk about ghosts. They did not want to discuss ghosts. And even now, as a museum, when I would answer the door, I would say, "Hi, welcome to the Morris-Jumel Mansion. We're haunted." We don't bring it up unless you bring it up, because we are a museum first. But now we're willing to discuss it. But back then, they didn't discuss it. So even if people come with saying, "Listen, I saw someone in a house at 3 a.m., which we have as well," and Vinny can allude to that and talk a little bit more about some of the letters, because he used those letters to write the play that takes place in the mansion. But yeah, there are people who, since it opened as a museum in the period of 1904 to 1906, have been saying they've experienced things, but the management never really wanted to talk about it. So, but Vinny can talk about a little bit more on the details of some of those things as well.
Very cool. Getting back into the history really quickly here, everybody that was anybody seemed to have crossed the threshold of the Morris-Jumel Mansion. Can you give us a little idea of, I mean, you said George Washington, he used it as a stronghold for 5 weeks and was there. What happened? Who else walked through there and why?
Well, it was originally built by Colonel Roger Morris. It was built as an 8,500 square foot summer home. It's just a vacation home. It's on the second highest point of Manhattan, so that's why he chose that location. And it was just used as a summer home for about 10 years. But Morris ends up fleeing to London when the revolution started to heat up. And Washington and Morris knew each other. That's what's fascinating. They actually were rival suitors for Mary Philipse Hand, who was super rich and the most available young woman to marry at that time in the colonies. She was smart, she was beautiful, and she was rich, and all these guys wanted to marry her. As we know, Washington didn't marry her, but there's a more personal connection, kind of that triangle of Mary Philipse, Morris, and Washington. But so that's how Morris, through mutual friends and acquaintances, got the gossip that Morris had fled to London, and that's why he knew that home was empty. And that's why he was able to retreat safely from Brooklyn, where they're getting their butts kicked, safely over to the mansion. The whole American Revolution could have ended in Brooklyn. So it's fascinating how the little or not so little Morris-Jumel Mansion plays a huge part in continuing the revolution. And then a couple days later, after he got there, that was September 16th, is when the Battle of Harlem Heights took place, and they won. So it was huge. It was a huge morale booster. If you remember when I alluded to in the show with the Holzer Files, as far as we talk about known deaths and unknown deaths or purported deaths, it was used as a hospital. We can't confirm exactly who or how many may have died there, but I always tell people, if you ever saw the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson, came out years ago, in the opening scene, they're using that grand home as a hospital. Same concept, especially with officers. They would be brought in. It's a summer day. It's hot. They definitely would have been using that as a hospital. Not everyone made it from their wounds.
So you've got that. Then, of course, there's some ties to Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. And now tell me about Burr, sir, if you wouldn't mind. And let me,
sure. A lot of people just know the mansion now because of Hamilton, so the musical. Right. So, which is great.
I've had to watch Hamilton about 20 times with my daughters, so now I'm fascinated. They love the fact that there's a tie to this house with Burr. But tell me about Hamilton and Burr and how they passed through those doors.
Yeah, Hamilton would have been there twice. He would have been there as an artillery captain. He wasn't kind of like Washington's right-hand man at that point, too young and too early in the war, but he was an artillery captain, really proving himself. So he was there. Adams was there. There was a famous cabinet dinner that took place when Washington was president. So basically you had Washington, Jefferson, Hamilton, Adams, Knox. The wives were there as well. So you had a huge, important gathering of famous fathers, founding fathers, and founding mothers that were there. Burr comes into the picture after Eliza becomes a widow when Stephen Jumel passes away. The rumor, of course, is that Eliza killed her husband, Stephen. The other side of it is that the other story of that part of it is that was created by the grandson who was written out of the will. And so he wanted to slander Eliza and created that story. So we somewhere, maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle, but of course we just don't know. We'll never know. But Eliza was very interested in moving up in society because she was not accepted by society. She grew up very poor. Stephen Jumel was an immigrant. He was not accepted in the Blue Blood Society of New York as a Frenchman. She grew up in dire poverty in Rhode Island. So Eliza was looking to climb that social status ladder, and she felt that Burr could provide that. Burr just wanted to marry her for her money. He was in debt. He had past debts. He wanted to come up with some new schemes to make some quick money. So he wanted to basically hook up with her because he was looking for a sugar mama and wanted the money. So it was a marriage of convenience. This was not about love or all of that. They got married in the mansion in the front parlor. Not even a year and a half after Stephen passed away, and Burr moved in. And within a few months, she actually kicks Burr out because he was spending all of her money like crazy without checking with her. Past debts he owed, new schemes he was involved in. And then he also got busted having an affair with one of the servants who was in her early 20s. And keep in mind, he's like in his late 70s. So, yeah. So she kicked him out. She filed for divorce. The Hamilton connection actually comes into play again because Eliza was very shrewd. If she was around today, she'd be a queen of social media because she knew the papers were going to grab a hold of this. So because of those optics and because of the media back then with the newspapers, she could pick any attorney she wants, but she purposely chose Alexander Hamilton Jr. to file the divorce paperwork just to kind of stick it to her one more time.
That's a little knife twist, yeah?
Yeah, so you always have these backstories, we love those backstories in terms of history. And then fast forward a couple years later, Burr's living in Staten Island. The week the divorce is supposed to be finalized, he had a stroke, and then he actually died the day that the divorce was supposed to be finalized. So she ends up keeping the name, the widow Burr, and that was really important because when she goes to Europe, she's introduced as the widow of the former vice president of the United States of America. So she kept that title part, which is what she wanted anyways, and probably kept a good chunk of money too.
I love all the little comments coming in. Aaron Burr, Revolutionary Era Playboy. Lena says, scandalous. It is.
Always.
What stories to hear coming from this. Now, the weird part is when the room that we had a weird experience in upstairs and that Ghost Adventures had a weird experience, wasn't that considered Burr's room?
Absolutely. That's the room.
Oh, well, the room where it happened. We'll talk about that in a few moments as well, because that is a crazy experience that we had. But there was nothing about this house that wasn't off the charts bizarre. I wrote down some notes because I wanted to make sure that we covered it. I mean, during our baseline investigation, we're hearing footsteps. I'm sitting down in the basement and sitting by that fireplace area. I've got my table set up, all my monitors. I'm listening to them as they're walking around upstairs, and we've accounted for everyone, and we start hearing footsteps moving around. That starts drawing us. We're hearing what sounds like conversations, just like the next room over throughout the house. There were some just really powerful energies that were making themselves known. And for that, talking of powerful energies, we'll go to Vinny here, because Vinny, you came in to kind of show me around and talk to me about the paranormal activity. And for anybody that's interested, you can check out morrisjumel.org/paranormal for more information about their tours and ghosts and such. But Vinny, you had been working there for a while, like you said. When we were there, and I know it doesn't play as spectacularly on TV, but as we're talking down in that basement area, you were telling us a story about, and if you don't mind setting that up for me again, about the table moving violently and such. Kind of walk us through that experience, would you?
Yes, sure. So that actually took place during a public investigation a couple of years back. And the table, it was a 6-foot table, plastic top with metal legs, and it was in the middle of the room. We had guests set up on 3 sides of the table, and the front of it was empty. And they were facing the fireplace. And I was standing over toward the door, and another staff member was standing pretty close to me. And, I was in the middle of talking, and then all of a sudden the table jumped about 2 to 3 feet forward toward the fireplace. And, it was shocking. It was frightening. And once we got over the initial nervous laughter, I asked, okay, so who kicked it? Who moved it? I thought someone had moved it either joking around or by accident. And what's really interesting about it is that at the head of the table was a family. It was a mom, a dad, and a teenage son. And then sitting beside them on the opposite angle was an older couple, a husband and a wife. And I've told this story on on other investigations. And that couple has actually come back on other investigations, and they say that they swear it wasn't the kid. Because I thought the kid accidentally kicked it with his foot and then was embarrassed, didn't want to say anything. But the woman says, no, I was actually looking at his feet because he had really shiny shoes on that night. And he kicked it, and she said it did not look like he kicked the table at all. So his feet did not make contact with that table, and it just moved. So, I mean, the jury's still out for me as to whether or not, it was a guest or, someone who has passed on. But so that was the story that I was starting to tell you down there.
Right. You're relating the story, and there's track lighting up on the ceiling, right? And all of a sudden, it just starts to kind of pulsate. And it's like it was, hey, guys, like it's trying to get our attention. And at first I'm like, it's an old building, probably bad wiring. But it kept doing it we only show a minute of that entire little scene, but that was going for a while. And then when I finally kind of pointed it out to you, you were watching the floor, seeing the light up and go off. And when we turn around, we start talking. Had you guys ever seen that before, where the lights just start like they're interacting with us?
So here's the thing. I've been working there for several years, and I had never seen that happen. And when it happened while we were recording, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, I got a little pissed because I thought it was someone like a PA or one of the producers messing around. And I have, just like Chris, we have a hard line of we're not faking evidence here. And so it's not really picked up on the show, but I looked because I know where the switch is. So I thought someone was messing with the light. I'm like, are they really doing this? And I turned and I looked, and there was no one there. Matter of fact, the closest person was like across the room, and they were like, no, it's not me. So it was a moment of kind of like frustration, anger, and then shock, and then oh, well, then what the hell is this? And by the way, because I know she's watching, to my mom, no, we did not mess around. We didn't fake that. That actually happened. And to this day, she kind of doesn't believe that it was that legitimate. So told you, Mom. All right. So
yeah. Well, I got to tell you, like you, that starts happening. And if you notice, I'm playing it out in my brain as it's happening. I'm trying to, is this really happening? Is somebody leaning against a dimmer switch? Is something happening here? But the weird thing is there was 3 or 4 different light pieces in that same fixture, but only one was responding to us. So even if somebody was messing with a slider or a dial, it would have been affecting each different light source. But it was just
I thought someone tapped into the electric of the building. I'm like, wow, they're really going for it. They're really good. But no, it was what you see is what you get. So. Yeah.
Chris, I forgot, did we sign that part of the agreement where we were allowed to tap into the electronics of the building?
Yeah, you guys were good. You're fine.
Yeah. Yes, we watched that, and you know what people get a kick out of is the fact that I'm like, hey, if you don't want us here, just go off. And it was super bright, right? My hand, super bright, and then poof. And I just looked at you, and I'm like, good enough for me. And you're like, yep, let's get out of here.
Yeah. Also, too, I just got to interrupt real quick. I was outside at that time. It was just you guys were downstairs. I was outside with the crew. When Vinny came out to me, he was like, dude, you're not going to believe what happened in there. He was, in a good way, freaked out. And it was really cool because I'm like, I can't wait to see this on video. Because Vinny was like going crazy about how cool it was.
It doesn't play out as cool when you're in the moment and like you're talking in this light, and it only shows a few seconds. But Vinny, you remember we talked to it for probably a minute or two, right?
Yeah.
And
we had a pretty good conversation with them.
Yeah, but I mean, it was giving us the full signal, and I think what TV again is going for is, okay, this is happening. We've shown it. Now let's move on to the next scene because they can't spend a minute of you and I staring up at the lights, in awe as it's going on. But we get that immediate response, and people ask me, why did you leave? And I've always been a firm believer. I respect the spirits. And if we're there irritating the spirit or agitating it, and it was feeling uncomfortable with us there, we should just leave. There's plenty. That place is huge. Let's go look around the building and see what else we can find. And there was a lot of activity. Is there a floor, Vinny, a room in that place that doesn't have some kind of activity? Why don't we do this? We'll take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be back with more of the best in paranormal talk radio. You're listening to Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the program. Thank you all for being here and being a part of our evening. The ghosts have frozen Vinny's feet again. Chris, maybe you can answer from your years of working there and people, constantly sharing stories. Is there any place that doesn't seem to have some kind of paranormal activity take place?
It seems like every room. What's fascinating and one thing what we do when we would do paranormal investigations there, we would try and experiment. And so we would actually break up men and women. We'd have the women go into Eliza's room. The men would go into Burr's room. I actually wouldn't go in. I would stay at the edge of the room. And as there are probably folks watching right now who've been on investigations with us, we always get more activity, whether it's a REM pod going off or motion sensor light balls going off. We always would get more activity when women were in Eliza's room. Then we switch, and then we would bring the men in. The women would go to another part of the house, and 9 times out of 10, nothing would ever happen when the guys were in there. We've had some really intense moments with footsteps and sounds above that ceiling, which you can't even access as a human being because it's impossible. The way the roof pitches like that, you can't get to it. We don't have a vermin problem. So as far as like debunking, we don't have any vermin. We actually have feral cats that live on the ground. So we have like a 0 vermin problem there. And so we've had some really intense moments with public investigations, let alone Vinny and I having our own experiences as staff members working.
And Vinny, once you had our experience with the lights, and I had asked you, was there a room in the place that doesn't have any kind of activity? Because it seems like every place has something strange going on. Do you know of any room that's kind of devoid of paranormal activity?
Well, I mean, it's that old if a tree falls in the forest kind of thing, right? So, if something's happening in a space that we don't go into, like we're not hanging out in the archives room all the time or in the, we have 2 different attics. Something might be happening that we don't know, but I've had experience happen in almost every part of that house, whether it be the boiler room, the gift shop, the octagon room. That being said, there are rooms in the house that have had a lot more activity. Yeah.
Well, I want to
even outside the building too, technically.
Right. And we're going to talk about some of that in a little bit as well. When I was talking with Angela was discussing, she was an experiencer there. She was standing outside of the room. And whose room was it? Now, there was some there's some of Napoleon's items or something in that room, if I remember correctly. Am I right?
It was William Chase's room across from the staircase, like when you go up on the second floor. Yeah, I believe you guys were standing in William Chase's bedroom, but also what we interpret to be Washington's bedroom while he was there, based upon documentation.
But isn't there something from Napoleon in that room as well, or believed to be at least?
I think it was a chest, right, Vinny?
Right. Yeah, the chest.
Yeah.
It was Napoleonic. Yeah, there's some pieces throughout the house that were acquired through an estate sale from the Napoleon family, the Bonaparte family, rather.
That when they had a big garage sale, I wonder if they had like hot dogs and crepes on the front yard while you're in shopping through Napoleon stuff. So we're standing outside of that room, and I'm talking to her, and she's talking about how she felt this big presence, almost like a guardian type presence, and it huffed in her face, right? This kind of, mm-hmm. And as she's describing it, and again, we don't show this, and because the camera is one behind me shooting her, one behind her shooting me, we don't catch it. But as the two of us are talking, something moves in that room. And we both turn and look into the room, and we keep talking, and then the shadow moves back the other way. And we both saw something moving around. That was strange to me, right? Because, I mean, it's like, it wasn't just my head. Both of our heads turned at the same time to see this. But then we hear from the stairwell what clearly sounds like a woman scream. Mm-hmm. We don't catch it on our cameras. We don't catch it on our recorders. But we all heard it, and it like freaked the out of us. I think I remember going downstairs and talking to you about it, Chris, because I was asking, man, are one of you guys setting us up with this? Is this a joke? Do you remember? Could you hear the scream from downstairs where you were?
I couldn't, but I was the first to tell you, like, listen, there's no other staff member around. There's no one. We're not doing anything for effect. That was the real deal.
Right. So we hear this scream now. The legend is that one of the maids or servants at some point took their own lives, perhaps on that stairwell. Do we know if there's any truth to that matter?
Vinny, you want to take that?
Yeah. So when we give our tours, we talk about known deaths in the house, and we talk about reported deaths. So for known deaths, we have Eliza Jamel and Stephen Jamel. And then for the reported deaths, we have the Hessian soldier that runs down the stairs from the third floor, trips and falls on his bayonet, and bleeds to death on the steps. And then the other one is the servant girl who does hang herself in the middle of that stairwell. Now, with those two stories, we don't have any names or dates attached to them, so we can't confirm whether or not they're real. That being said, if they are in fact real, we want to at least honor them and acknowledge them. I take it a step further in that, the house was a tavern. It was a military occupancy. It was vacant for 20 years. It was a museum starting in the early 1900s. So I'm sure that things have happened there that just were never documented. Someone could have died there in the 60s just by heart attack, and it just, didn't make it into a newspaper. So you never know, actually, how much activity is there.
When Hans Holzer visited, he visited a couple times, and he was able to do a seance, and he went with his transmedium Ethel Myers. Mm-hmm. You both have heard that audio from the episode, and it's chilling, right? First of all, anybody that's heard Ethel's voice, it's a very genteel voice, but she's very guttural with, wanting to know where her, saying that she was buried. They buried me alive. She takes on this very masculine, husky aspect to it. Do we have any idea of that point in the history? Do you think it could have just been perhaps when it was being used as a medical hospital, that medicine not being up to par at the time, the doctor might have mistaken and thought somebody was dead? They took him out and buried him, and the soul is lost and terrified from that aspect? Or does it have more of a tie to the Morris-Jumel story?
I think anyone's guess is good as anyone else's. I mean, we a couple of years ago actually learned of a diary of a Revolutionary War soldier that was turned into a book, and it was called Yankee Doodle Soldier. And in that book, they talk about these two soldiers that are walking along a path to the Morris estate, and they find a fallen comrade, and they bring his body back to the Morris estate and bury him on the property. Now, that story is very well possible, but at that time, you got to keep in mind that the property lines were it was river to river, and it's what would be now 40 city blocks. So yeah, it was probably someone was probably buried on the property, but over time, as it was divvied up over the legal battle and upward expansion of the city, it got reduced to what you see today. So again, it could be anybody or it could be someone very specific.
That's weird. I didn't know that part of the story, but it is. Again, there's something that plays into it. It's also New York, New Jersey, mob area. Bodies may have been buried at some point.
Yeah, that's
allegedly.
It's
Vinny,
just business.
no comment.
It's not
allegedly.
personal.
I want to remind people you can check out Holzer Files Season 1 on the Discovery Plus streaming service now. So you can go back and watch it. Next week, we are going to be taking a look at A Grave Revenge, The Haunting of the Whaley House. And stay tuned. At the end of tonight's episode, I've got a very special clip from that episode. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that, get a small sampling of what you can expect next week. So if you have not yet watched A Grave Revenge, Season 1, Episode 3, make sure you tune in for that. Now, I'm promoting it this way because the Travel Channel has a strange way of showing the episodes. I think our episode that we're discussing tonight was technically considered episode number 6 because it was the 6th episode we filmed. But as it turned out, it was the 2nd episode to actually air. So you might get confused as to what order. The ones I'm showing you here is the order that these episodes aired. That's how we're going to discuss them. So next week, Season 1, Episode 3, A Grave Revenge, The Haunting of the Whaley House. That is the episode where I get full-on physical contact. And that was the very first episode that we filmed together as the Holzer Files. And stay tuned at the end of tonight's little program for Holzer's Ghosts. I will show an exclusive little clip for you about that as well. But tonight, again, we're going to get back into discussing the episode, They Buried Me Alive. Going into the story a little deeper and the type of paranormal activity that takes place there, hearing screams, hearing footsteps, shadow people. You've got the woman in black. You've got the maid spirit. You've got all these different things. But then there's this other element, something that seems not residual in nature, but maybe a little, and I always hesitate calling things darker or malevolent because it is a museum and it's a historic site, and I don't want to turn people off to go in there. It's an amazing location. But there's definitely something there that's a little less friendly. Let's go with that politically correct version of this. A little less friendly. Have either one of you had experiences with something along those lines?
As for me, it kind of, the time I think I was most frightened, and I really don't get scared with a lot of this. People say, how can you work there? I enjoy it. I mean, I grew up in Southern California, and my favorite ride at Disneyland was the Haunted Mansion. So you can kind of put it together. So to me, it was a dream job working at the Morris-Jumel Mansion. But when we were setting up, we had already set up for a play that night, one of Vinny's plays. So if anyone's been to the Morris-Jumel Mansion, you know we're set in a park. It's gated. We actually had cleared the park, locked it. The caretakers who were living there had already gone out to dinner. So it was myself and the former director, and she was in the gift shop working on her laptop. I was at my desk at my computer, and we'd heard 2 female voices laughing and a table being pulled that was set up on the brick floor. And so it was a very grating sound, metal feet on brick. And we looked at each other and we hauled ass downstairs because we thought maybe someone broke in, or sometimes, sadly, the mansion attracts people for the wrong reasons, for vandalism, for other things, because there's that curiosity factor. We got down there. There was nobody there. We went to the boiler room, which is on the same level right down there. There's nobody there. All the doors are locked from the inside. And when we actually went into the caretaker's apartment, we have keys. We actually did a walkthrough through the caretaker's apartment. There was nobody downstairs, and there's only one way up. And you know, Dave, because when you saw Shane come up there, there's only one way up and down. It's those stairs. There was nobody in the mansion. And then that's when we actually noticed that the table had indeed been shifted from how we had it set up for the play that night. So that was a little... If you want to get goosebumps, that's a goosebump giver right there. It was a trip, and that was probably the only time I think I've really been a little bit more scared. And keep in mind, the sun's up. I always tell people, I said, hauntings and ghost stories, as you know, for TV, it always looks cooler with it's dark and it's spooky and all this, but a lot of hauntings, at least for the Morris-Jumel Mansion, especially with Eliza's story with her apparition, could be any time of day or night. And the sun was still up, so it wasn't at midnight, it wasn't the witching hour, it was just in the afternoon, and then all hell broke loose, so to speak, down the stairs.
What about you, Vinny? Have you ever been really unnerved by something there?
Yeah, I mean, like Chris, once you're there for a while, you kind of develop a callus to it. But there have been a few times when I was by myself and something happened. I'm like, well, that's not right. The one time that really jumped out to me was, again, it was the end of the day. I was in the house by myself. We had locked up the house. We cleared and locked the gate to the park. And I locked all of the doors, and I was sitting in the gift shop, and I was just waiting for, to finish up some emails and then head out. And then all of a sudden, the front doorbell rang, and I jumped up. I was like, "Oh, I locked someone in the park," because it's not impossible to miss someone. It's a big park. It gets really dark in there. There's no lights, and sometimes people are just hanging out in the sunken garden or whatever the case may be. Or they sneak in when they're walking their dog and you just miss them when you're clearing it. So I thought that's what happened. But it was about like a half hour after I had locked the gate. So I jumped up, I go to open the door really quick, and there was no one there. And I look around, and again, the amount of time that it took for me to get to the door, it really would have been impossible for someone to jump over the gate and make it and clear it. I actually had to call the cops for that, because earlier in the week, someone had arranged all of these like sticks and bricks and like all kinds of like stones along the pathway to kind of like this Blair Witch altar looking thing. So someone was messing with the property. It wasn't really a big deal, but it just kind of, we were on high alert as it was. So I was like, all right, maybe someone's messing with the house. So called the cops for that, and they did a walkthrough, and they're like, yeah, we got nothing. So yeah, but that's one of the few times. And another time, it was the end of the night. It was the end of an actual investigation. There was 3 of us. We were getting ready to leave, and all of a sudden, clear as day, we heard a woman singing on the 3rd floor, just like a quick melody, and then it was gone. So
again, some of those moments are historic. You've got voices. You're going to hear voices in this house from all the layers. That's why Cindy, I give her again a lot of credit, because she's got so much. She's like this open radio, every frequency is bombarding her at once, and she's trying to tune to understand the story. And what was so weird throughout the entire thing is she's like, these spirits were brought here, man. They were brought here. They don't belong here. They're not part of this story. They're not part of the Morris-Jumel Mansion history, as in the historic aspects that we know so well. And you had told me during our time together, Vinny, about these little offerings that would be left out, and that there would be these little Santeria or little religious ceremonies that would seem to take place on the property. And you guys had video. You see them come in their white robes and do these little ceremonies. Did you have any understanding of what they were doing or why they were doing it? I know you describe it in the episode, but let's go back to that for a minute.
Well, as I said, it's a predominantly Dominican neighborhood, and in the culture, every culture has a different outlook on the paranormal and the afterlife, and that's great. And for some people, it's thought of if there's spirits still hanging around a location, it's not a good thing that they have unfinished business. So, from what we understand, they were just trying to give an offering or a peace offering, whatever the case may be, to try to help them move along. And, they never did anything too detrimental. They never caused any property damage, so it was okay. But, yeah, every once in a while we'd come to work, and then you'd see a little pile of it'd be like Skittles or like cornflakes. It would be like 3 piles of candy. And, that was the modern-day equivalent of, I guess, an offering. So, I mean, it was sweet of them, but, that's our understanding of what they were trying to do.
So you had told me about this, and as we're down during our ghost hunt, and I want to hit some of the points during our ghost hunt that were weird. I mean, we're getting some powerful hits on the K2 meter and the Mel meter, beep, and just like holding itself in one stasis and the numbers going up like crazy. That was really weird. That to me was sign something powerful was there, because again, it's a REM pod function. Vinny, because you investigate, and Chris, you've got to get close to it to set it off like that. And it was just squawking like mad, letting us know that there was something there. The spiders. Now, that's the one part I do believe you guys are screwing with us on. I've got to believe you have remote control spiders, because that was the creepiest thing. And the thing is, none of us knew about it until we started reviewing the evidence. And Shane was like, because he's standing there and you just see him zipping down throughout the entire basement area while we're doing our talk. And we're not even realizing how close these things are coming to us. Yeah. But it always seemed that the spiders kind of started to make motion. They'd either be bolting up or coming down quick as something strange was about to happen. That was really kind of unsettling to so many of our viewers. Here we've got ghosts, we've got screams, we've got footsteps, we've got voices, and the people are freaked out because spiders are dropping in an old basement.
See, this is the part I love about the culture of paranormal investigators, because we're so paranoid. See, we thought you guys were screwing with us. Like we don't trust anybody, not even each other. So no, we didn't do that. We didn't pay the spiders to be there. So
have you? I mean, obviously, it's an old house. It's an old basement down there. But seeing all that stuff come down, that was weird. After you watch that, were you a little bit more cautious when you went down there at night to do nighttime investigations with the lights off? Were you doing a lot of this?
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty short, so I don't got to worry about it too much. But yeah, I was looking up.
Yeah, lots of spiders. So some of the other activity that really kind of caught me, we at one point. When Shane and I were investigating and capturing weird things going on, I want people to remember this. My SLS camera is on an independent battery source. Our cameras that the guys are holding are on independent battery sources. Each one has their own battery. Our system that you see that we're watching and reviewing everything is all plugged in. And Chris, you were there on site.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, my SLS goes off, our cameras power down, and then you see that our screens go black.
Everything.
That's the only power that was affected in the house that night.
It was, and again, like Vinny says, we don't trust anybody, but because we're skeptical believers, both of us. Right. But I was like, what the is going on here? I was blown away at that because of the fact that each one is independently charged and operating. That was a total trip.
Yeah, and they boom, and then boom, they all come back up. Mm-hmm. That was a bizarre moment. One of the other things, and again, we don't fake things on the show. We capture it as it happens. But I did ask, there was one thing that took place that did not make it on the show. It doesn't even get mentioned on the show, and it broke my heart. We had gone into, I'm sorry, did you say it was Marsh's room, Vinny?
William Chase.
I'm sorry, Chase. I don't know where Marsh came from. So William Chase's room, we'd gone in there because that's where I'd seen the shadow people. And we were hearing some thumping around, and they're like somebody was walking back and forth in that room. So we went in, and our camera guy's following us around in there. And as I'm walking out of the room, I've got my K2 meter out in front of me. And as I'm going, boom, it's just like I ran into something. The K2 meter goes up and lands on the bed. Mm-hmm. And I turned and I looked and I'm like, holy shit, what just happened? And Rob's like, what happened? Our camera guy, but he was behind me. So all he sees is up over my shoulder comes the K2 meter. Mm-hmm. And he's like, Dave, I didn't catch it. I wasn't even focused on that. I was walking through the room with you guys. And I'm like, can you come around? I'll show you what it looked like. And he's like, no, because they'll think we faked it. We got to just leave it alone. And it broke my heart because it literally felt like if you've ever been texting or doing something and you're not paying attention, you walk into a door and it knocks your hand and makes you drop something. That's exactly how it felt. And that K2 meter just right over my shoulder and hit the bed. Yeah. That freaked me out. That made me have to step outside the room for about 5 minutes. And I'm like, this, Shane, that's crazy. I bumped into something. There was nothing in that door frame, and I hit it like a full-on wall, like lurch, and that was it. And that's exactly what Angela had explained, this big masculine force standing in that doorway. We capture in Burr's room that using the SLS camera, and Ghost Adventures had been there years before in that same room, and they're filming, and this figure appears and appears to crawl up Billy Tolley.
Yeah.
Yep.
And in that room, I think the only room that's the only room the SLS camera captured something, and we capture that the being, and then it kind of climbs up on the mantle and then starts to spider crawl across the wall. I've got to ask you guys, seeing that, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, we've had some, that room in the house, it kind of feels detached because it is down at the end of a long hallway, so it kind of has its own personality. Each room of the house has its own personality, really. The kitchen's completely different from Burr's room, completely different from the Octagon, but that room specifically, it's hit or miss. I mean, we could go in there, do an investigation, and for weeks we won't have anything, and then one night it'll just light up, whether it be motion detectors, REM pods, K2 meters, but yeah, that room is pretty wacky. It's the only room in the house too, and I don't know if this really plays into anything, but the entire house is interpreted to the Jumel period, and that room specifically has been interpreted to the Morris period, and they were able to do that, obviously based upon primary sources and letters written back and forth, but trying to match color and wallpaper patterns to the time period of what would have been available. So you talk about things like Singapore effect or whatever, recreating activity or the environment that they might recognize, and you might have something there. So I mean, that's would have looked like when Washington was there, because he was coming there just after the Morris period and before the Jumels, so it still would have had that Morris feel to it. So,
and what's kind of strange about that room is that we often get a lot of high EMF.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and that's at the very, very north end of the house. There's nothing really electrical other than one socket. And as you know, Dave, one socket's not going to create massive EMF readings on a K2 meter that's 7 or 8 feet away. It's just not going to happen. So we can't explain why the very top of the house, so to speak, the northern end of the house in that small room can have such high EMF. It's really strange, and we just can't explain it.
We also caught another scream that didn't make it. You heard the kind of cry that brought us downstairs, but at one point we heard a scream up in the attic. So we were on that what would be the third level, I guess, by Eliza Jumel's room. We hear a scream, and I said, "Are we allowed to go up there?" And I remember they radioed down to you, Chris. They're like, "We're hearing something. Can we go up there?" And you'd given us permission. Mm-hmm. So we go storming up there. Nobody else had, and help me with this. So just, I understand, nobody else had been up in that attic area, period.
Not at all. Because of the nature of the filming in the middle of the night and the wee hours of the night, there's no other staff there other than myself to supervise it, and then with Vinny, and that's it. There's nobody else. So there, and Vinny and I have had our own experiences where we're hearing things up there and there's nobody up there, and we don't know what the hell's going on. It's pretty trippy.
You're right. So we hear the scream. Again, it doesn't get recorded, which is weird. That's direct voice phenomena. That's one of the rarest forms because you can physically hear it, but nothing records it. We were all excited. We knew we were going to get that on either one of our recorders or on one of the cameras. And we've got expensive cameras with good sound equipment, and we're all mic'd up. We can hear, literally, I feel bad because our poor guy's got to keep sliding on the mic as my stomach's going during investigations. You can hear everything, and we got nothing from that scream. So that was very bizarre. Betty, I'm going to take a quick second to answer your question. There are a lot of haunted places in the Midwest, but not sure if Hans did anything in that part of the country. A lot of people ask that. Yes, he investigated everywhere, but he was much more heavily centered around the eastern part of the United States because that's where he was based, and he went to those cases. Plus, he loved history. So you've got the Morris-Jumel Mansion. You've got places like that are really steeped in history. He wanted to go where George Washington had been. He wanted to walk in those footsteps as well. So we do get outside of the East Coast, and you'll get to see those episodes. And hopefully, if we get a season 3, we'll get to visit Europe and maybe some of the other Midwestern areas and Southwestern areas that he had a chance to visit. Chris, you mentioned, and I know our time is fleeting, but you mentioned that the ghost stories actually go back into the 1800s.
Sure. We have it that, Vinny and I have talked about this, and it was kind of almost fashionably cool to say your house was haunted. Almost gives it a little bit more credence or a cachet, or just kind of this really cool aspect for a lot of people. Some people, not all. But yeah, we have people where family members writing about things happening in the house that they can't explain. When Eliza passed away, her descendants could hear like fingernails, like tapping on a vase, that type of thing. So for sure, more intelligent than residual haunting, though. It seems to be a lot more on the intelligent side than the residual side. We don't have that specific one woman in white who shows up every evening at midnight coming down the stairs. That's not really our thing, usually at the mansion, but it's more intelligent and interactive, if you want to call it that.
Well,
but
when
yeah,
I
it goes back to the 1800s for sure.
When I die, if you guys are hiring for that role, I'll be happy to be the woman in white coming down the stairs every night at midnight.
You'll look beautiful. Don't worry.
Good. I know, you've seen my legs in dresses. I mean, why not show them off on the other side if they don't want them here? We get now this episode, folks. For those of you watching in airing order, becomes the first real poor Shane episode. Last episode, you saw Shane get grabbed in the neck and everything, but he was kind of centered in this. But this place unnerved everybody. All three of us were on edge. What you didn't know was poor Shane, he's got an earpiece in through the entire thing so that we can communicate. But I dropped my walkie and I wasn't using it. He's hearing voices coming through the walkie telling him, get out and who's there, and just he thinks I'm screwing with him upstairs. At the one point, you could see him doing it, and they show the split screen, and I'm in the other room with our camera guy doing a totally different experiment. Those words aren't coming out of my mouth. So he's hearing all of this, and everybody gets on me because I force him back down in the basement. But he had been down there, and you guys know, it's not pitch black. It's dark. And he's down there, and it's that dark enough that you can see when something moves in the shadows. And he's seeing something moving around behind him, and he's hearing what's at first sounds like footsteps above him and then sounds like it's coming from behind him. That's when poor Shane hauls ass out of there. Now, you got to remember, folks, I'm not privy to what's happening to him. And this is only the 6th episode we filmed together, and this guy's jumpy, and he's freaking out. And, as the lead investigator, I got to shut him down, try to get him back into mojo. And so when he comes tearing up I told him, you're going back down there. We can't run out. We can't be afraid. We can't go into these places and jump and scream every time we see something. And, I love it. It's one of the most endearing moments in the entire Holzer Files deal when he goes, all right, fine. He goes back down. I don't even want to go down there. I don't even have my goddamn flashlight. And he just mopes his way back down in the basement. And it just keeps getting weirder for him and Cindy. And they're both getting overloaded. And what really broke my heart about that part of it as well is I'm having my own experience. I had the darkness meter, which was a thermal device, and you just see it briefly. But I was having a conversation, and I was following something around the room. I could lift it up a foot, and it was red, so it was hot. I could drop it to the ground. It was green and moderate. I'd put it in the middle, and it'd be blue, which means it was ice cold. Right in the middle of the air, and then it'd be gone, and you'd see it turn to green again. And I'd walk forward, and I could follow this through the room. It was blowing me and the cameraman away. We couldn't believe what we were getting, but it didn't stack up with the fear factor that was mounting on the floor above me and below me during that episode. Because it was funny. Our director and camera guy, Rob, he said, "Is this what it's like for you at the Schrader home on the regular basis?" Because it's dad, 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 dad. All I'm hearing is Dave, 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 Dave. Shane's yelling for me. Cindy's yelling for me. I'm trying to do the experiment. We keep saying, just stay in your room. I'm making contact. Leave me alone. We're not showing all that because, again, we're trying to keep this tight and concise. But yeah, I'm having this like ongoing parental fight with my 2 children. Stay in your rooms. Think about what you've done. I'm trying to communicate with mom, right? And it was just this weird moment. But we're getting all this activity taking place on all levels simultaneously. And again, what's so cool is, Chris, you're stationed there because that's part of the contract. Now, right off of that main room, there's a little gift shop. You stay in the gift shop. We've got eyes on you the whole time, so they know you're not screwing with us. We know you're not doing anything. When you're hearing everybody yelling from different floors, freaking out, and you can hear footsteps, you can hear everybody kind of reacting. I got to ask you again, I know you guys don't trust anybody, but you're hearing a lot of this byproduct for yourself. As the acting director, what's going through your head?
Honestly, I was laughing to myself because I'm like, welcome to the mansion. Vinny and I know all about this. We have our own experience. It's actually kind of cool because it validates a lot of what we and other staff members have experienced for years. So it was actually like, good. Now someone else can experience it in the middle of the night. It's not just Vinny and myself. So actually, I was kind of cracking up to myself because I just thought it was really freaking cool.
Now, when we get in, and I've complained about this as well as many of the viewers, I know it's a bummer. We got the EVP that were in what sounded like another language. It doesn't always convey well when you process it down, put it in the computer, then added it onto the TV. Something gets lost. And to the credit of our producers, they're like, we don't want to mess with it because if we tweak it so it can be heard better, it's going to sound too clean and people are going to think we're faking it. So we're just going to let it play out how it comes across. But Chris, when we were doing the reveal to you and you could hear the Alejo and Egon EVPs, had you ever gotten EVP in foreign languages or strange, unexplainable languages or words before?
Not that I've experienced. I think Vinny could attest to that. I don't think we've ever had anything in another language.
Not that I can think of, yeah.
I do speak Spanish, but even with that, I've never had anything come over in Spanish. Yeah, that was really, and that's why I was like, what the hell is going on here? Because that was out of a familiarity aspect that I have never encountered before at the mansion. We've had animal screeching sounds and other things that have been captured, but not another language.
Right. Now, to cue people in on this, as we were going through this, again, part of my job as the lead investigator is to trying to keep everybody on task and understanding the story and sticking with the investigation. And when Cindy's telling me that what she's getting is not part of the story, it's other energies, other spirits there, I'm racking my brain to try to understand it. And Vinny, that's when your words hit me about these religious ceremonies, these little offerings that are made. And it hits me and I go, wait a minute. And again, they don't show this revelation in the basement, but I turn to Cindy and that's when I explained to her about the Santeria practitioners and the Dominican religious practices that take place on the property. So I take the word phonetically and Cindy breaks it down, takes it, and we find out that these mean, in the Santeria belief, outsider is Alejo and Egon is ancestors or spirits. And all of a sudden we're blown away. We're talking to the priest that we had come to the house with your permission to try to help out and understand what are we dealing with here. And this was really exciting for me, and an aspect I wish would have made the episode. But he explained something to us regarding how blessed their religion is, and that a lot of it is connected to Earth. And in your area, the Morris-Jumel Mansion Park there is really the only gardeny area that big anywhere close. I mean, what's closer than that people could go to like that?
Yankee Stadium.
Yeah. So
a lot of grass.
Yeah.
What I understand is that they would come there sometimes with their own burdens, with their own spirits, their own demons, whatever it is that they're coming, and they make these donations. They say their prayers, and they're trying to give over to the land, who they believe is powerful. They're trying to give these things away, this part of their spirituality, the negative, the whatever they're trying to break. And maybe that's what's manifesting there, is that it's not really the dark presence has nothing to do with the amazing historic center of this, but really just kind of this spiritual garbage dump that it's become. And even though they're holding it in reverence and they are doing protective spells to make sure that none of your ghosts leak out into their homes in the area, they're also unloading their negativity to the earth to give back, to get rid of it. And that was a real holy shit minute for me. Yeah. And as I explained that to Cindy, it all kind of clicked for her. And it really was, it was exciting and refreshing. And what I really enjoyed, and I don't think they show it in the episode, and I keep saying that over and over, Chris, but you, when we tell you this, you go, you know what? With the popularity of Hamilton, I thought for sure you were going to come find Hamilton's ghost and Aaron Burr, and they're still locked in this duel to the death on the other side. And just kind of that expectation, you were surprised that that was kind of the outcome of what we bumped up against.
Yeah, totally.
Was the Santeria. But does that make sense to you and Vinny?
Mm-hmm. No, it makes total sense. I'm sure if I was a producer, I mean, I don't know what goes through a producer's head, but I'm sure that it was so heavily focused on Eliza that I'm sure they would have preferred that it would all been Eliza as an EVP. But you can't force this to happen. It just happens the way it happens. Maybe we all wanted Eliza to show up so much. Maybe she couldn't get through because there was other things going on. I don't know. But all I do know is that I'm not surprised because there just seems to be, and Cindy talks about, there's just so many layers there. It's layer upon layer, generation upon generation, century upon century. It's a lot of history, and a lot of people have come through there. So I'm not surprised at all.
Well, I mean, I want to add, to quote Holzer himself, he was the one who said, a good investigator is going to work with the evidence they find, not the evidence they want to find. Right. So, that's how it goes sometimes.
Right. And like the pages, as I mentioned, like the pages in a history book, right? That Morris-Jumel is one sliver of everything that took place in this location. And what decided to reveal itself to us was this. Now, we know that Eliza's spirit was there. Cindy could sense it. We got that kind of standoffish feel. And out of respect, you don't see Shane and I go in her room because she kept saying, don't come in my room. So we never entered her room. We investigated everything but her room. Cindy's the only one that went in there. And Cindy was even being shut down. So we went with, again, what we were picking up. And like you said, Chris, to the production, it'd be great if we were hitting Morris-Jumel. Sure. We come in with the name Holzer again, talking about Hans Holzer. She remembers the last time Hans Holzer was here. Out went Stephen Jumel, and she stood her ground and said, I'm not leaving. This is my home. Right? I'm the master of this home. I'm not leaving. We come back in. She's in her room with the door locked, listening to AC/DC. She wants nothing to do with us, tuning us out like a teenager. And that's it. She took her stand, and that was all. So it gave way for everything else to kind of reveal itself to us.
Yeah.
At least that's my take. I could be wrong. Don't jump on me so quick, guys. I know I've blown your minds with how deep and wide my expanse is on this, but that is what
people come to lectures or investigations, and because you put yourself out there as an investigator or someone who's done this more than once or twice, they think that you have all the answers, and the reality is that we don't know. I mean, anyone's guess is as good as anyone else's, and that we're just working with a couple of EVPs or a couple of sensors going off, or past claims or reports, and we try to piece it together from there. So you take one investigation at a time.
It was really a pleasure in all ways to meet you guys, to get to hang out with you and investigate the Morris-Jumel Mansion. Everybody asks me what are my favorite episodes from season 1. Ocean-Born Mary and Devil in Texas and Morris-Jumel Mansion are the 3 that come to mind. I loved, just like I said, being in that house. I mean, for whatever it's worth, the energy that we expended, we're now one of those pages of the history of that house. And it's in good company with you gentlemen and all the other great things that have taken place there, and historic moments. So that to me was really an exciting aspect of being there. I can't tell you how much we appreciate you guys letting us back in at that point and being willing to be a part of the show. And, just so everybody knows, Vinny reached out to me about getting together to discuss more of this recently. And then I told him, hey, I'm doing this Holzer's Ghost thing. Let's get together. And he hooked me up with Chris so we could all do this again. So, Vinny, thanks for being that spark to get the three of us back together to do this.
Well, thanks for having us. It's our favorite thing to talk about. So,
now,
any chance we can get to geek out.
In a few seconds, I'm going to show a scene from next week's episode. But before we leave, I wanted to talk about one of my favorite moments. Of course, after we talk to the Santeria practitioners, we're asking them to come in and do a cleansing. And we're so used to Christianity's polite ways. And I don't want to say that. That makes it sound like they were impolite. They were not. But, Christianity and Native American, they're in there with shells and smoke, and they're very politely chanting and praying and trying to clear these locations. So we're thinking that's what we've got going. So we get done with everything. We do our reveal to Chris. Chris, you give us permission. Yeah, go ahead. The guys can be outside. We can't have you inside. You can help clear this spot. They go outside. They've got their smudge sticks and the drums. And we explain, well, what is this? And he said, our religion is a very happy, loving thing. And we bring this energy to us. And he starts telling us about the spirits he can see. And he starts detailing some of the spirits in the house to us from outside, which was exciting. Then they start doing their deal. It's like 3:30 in the morning in New York. And he is the most delightful, full of life, energetic, holy man. And he's out there. And I apologize for the horrible imitation of it, but it's just this joyous speaking in this language and calling to the spirits and asking them to go. And he's doing this beautiful. And all of a sudden you just start hearing windows slide open. Hey, shut the fuck up. It's 3:00 in the morning. What the hell's wrong with you guys? It was something out of The Honeymooners. It was one of my favorite moments. Listening to pure New York, Jersey kind of accent blasting us from every corner to shut the hell up at this time of night. That was such a fun, hilarious. And again, you got to give it to the guy because he turns around and he goes, bless you, my brothers and sisters. Bless you, and may you all sleep well tonight. And then just kept going. He did not stop until he felt he cleared the energies of his people that had been out there doing what they were doing and had offered to come back if you guys ever needed him. With that said, after we left, did activity amp up? Did it slow down? Did it stay status quo? What can you tell us about the type of activity that took place after the Holzer Files?
For me, we're just as haunted before as after. Still having experiences. I had another disembodied voice experience. Still hear footsteps. The house will always be what it is, and it's an active place. And I hope that actually never changes in that sense.
Yeah,
did you feel anything dark after that?
No, it felt fine. So if they did something positive and it worked, then that's awesome. But yeah, we don't really investigate outside on the grounds. Really, it's always inside. But as far as the inside, it felt fine.
Very cool. Vinny, you've got a YouTube channel going. Tell people about what you're doing and how they can find you.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. It's Carbone_paranormal. And then I have a YouTube channel. I've got some collection of some media that I've been featured on. And then I've also got some original programming on there, investigations, and something I call Beyond the Haunt, where we kind of break down some paranormal theory and terminology. But you just check me out, Vinny Carbone, on Paranormal Investigator on YouTube. And I love the support, and thank anyone in advance for subscribing and checking me out. And Dave, I want to say thank you again for making this happen, having us on. And Chris, it's great seeing you again.
You too, Vinny.
Yeah, so we haven't seen each other in a minute.
We've got, for those of you listening to this in the podcast form, we'll have a link to Vinny's YouTube page on today's episode so you can find it. Chris, what's going on with you? Anything else you want to promote?
You can check out Netflix. If any of you have seen Surviving Death, you can see The Mansion and myself and a good friend of The Mansion, Mariah, doing an investigation. That is episode 5. So I'm sure many of who've tuned in have already seen it. But if you haven't, it's really cool. And you can hear the evidence we got. And we're going to be heavy in Burr's room. But it's really cool. Is
there any truth to the fact one of the EVPs you got was bring Dave Schrader back?
I think it was. I think
Excellent.
you should just come back and do it all over again.
I'd love to. And hopefully our paths will cross again, gentlemen. Next week, join us for a look at season 1, episode 3, A Grave Revenge, The Haunting of the Whaley House. This was the very first episode we filmed as a team. It was one of the more terrifying and unbelievable moments for me. You can watch Dave get knocked on his ass in the hashtag Poor Dave moment of season 1. And
horrible flashbacks to the 90s.
And hope you guys will tune in and check that out. Thank you all for tuning in and being a part of our world. Thank you for listening to Darkness Radio. Remember, you can listen to us on any podcast platform. Just look up Darkness Radio or call out to your smart device, play the newest episode of Darkness Radio, and you'll find it right there, right where we belong. We'll be back again with you. Go check out Discovery Plus for season 1 of the Holzer Files. And all I can tell you at this point is, as far as we know, season 2, the final 7 episodes, continue, we believe, in March on Travel Channel. If that changes, we will update you as we go along. So for Vinny and for Chris and myself and the rest of the Holzer Files team and Tim Dennis from Darkness Radio, thank you for tuning in. This is Darkness Radio.